Hey there. Are you feeling older than your age? Well, today, my friend Nick and I, we're going to share some tips with you how to feel younger than your age.
This is Be Well Now.
Let's do it.
I want to be well now.
I love being well. I love being well, but one thing we said too, maybe to just kick things off here at the beginning, is what does it mean to be well?
Well, we talked about it right before the podcast. You said something, and I made sure we wrote it down, that being healthy does not mean you won't get sick. Being healthy means you will recover faster. And I think that's kind of an inspiring way to think about health because, man, it sucks when you're sick, and it sucks when you don't feel good, and maybe that's what you're supposed to be feeling so that you have that perspective of what good really feels like. But anyway, I digress already. It's sort of a humbling thing when you're not feeling well, and to know that it's okay, that it's about bouncing back is, I think, sort of a kind of metaphorically important message, especially when it's like you sit on the pillow and meditate. Okay, your thoughts go away. Then you come back, right? You have a crisis, you have a bad day. It's okay, just bounce back. And the fact that being healthy means maybe you can work on bouncing back faster.
Absolutely. Yeah, you want to recover as quickly as possible. And you need to be able to get that pump from your workout or to feel sore, to feel like you actually did something. You made a change physiologically in your body to the musculoskeletal system, right? And you need to feel that. And that's a really important thing. But also, you need to be able to get through it and beyond it quickly.
And we're talking about feeling younger than your age. You asked, do you feel older than your age? And for a long time, I have. I know I have had a younger face, but I didn't feel like it. You know, waking up, kind of feeling like you're hungover and craving sweets and being super moody, and not all those I've recovered from, but we've worked together for a while. I'm your patient, you're Dr. Ron Dummar. And so let's talk about, you had 3 basic tenets. I always like to try to distill things down with you. 3 basic ways that we can feel younger than our age.
Absolutely. So the first one that we want to talk about is diet, and then we'll talk about communication, and then we'll talk about a morning routine.
Okay, so diet.
So in this, I want to just mention one more thing because we're talking about how we can feel younger. And so think about the children that you've looked around at and seen. Think about yourself as a child. And people often say, oh, they fall down, they get hurt, they bounce back. You hear doctors say that all the time. Oh, they bounce back real quick, real easy, no problem. Well, I have something that I developed in my own clinic because of injuries I see that children sustain that are not cared for as a result of the fact that children are compensating so well for injuries that they sustain. Well, why are they compensating for them? They're compensating for them so well because they're so young and their ligaments are lax and they have so much more flexibility in their bodies, right? Well, we want to be able to keep as much of that flexibility as possible and sustain it over time. All right? And so the difference between a young person and an older person really is just that the older person compensates less well. So younger people can fall and get injured. They can displace a hip, they can displace a rib or have some sort of issue or injury as a result of that fall, which would be the exact type of thing that an older person would experience, except the older patient is not compensating as well because they're more rigid. So their ligaments, the tendons, the joints, everything is more rigid. Now the question is, why are they more rigid? And they're more rigid often because of the diet that they have sustained over a period of time. And the diet has not fed and moistened and nourished those ligaments and those tendons and allowed them to set a stage where they could continue to be moist, right? And continue to be flexible. And so instead they become tight and brittle. And once your tendons and ligaments become tight and brittle as a result of eating a poor quality diet, then all of a sudden you have a fall, which you may have experienced when you were younger, and no problem when you were younger, you thought.
Right.
But now all of a sudden you break something, you tear something, and it's a more serious injury.
So what do the tendons want?
So amino acids, like the basic building blocks of proteins, amino acids. A lot of people are really into collagen right now. Well, collagen is like, connective tissue. You can actually get it from Jello or gelatin. I think there's a brand, Knox Gelatin's been around for maybe 100 years at this point, and they've been providing good, high-quality gelatin to people, which essentially is amino acids or collagen.
Okay, but we're talking about building blocks of good eating, and you've given me, I guess, a reason why, but yes. How do you make that message resonate when that's all people have heard their whole lives? Eat better food.
They're like, eat better. Just
healthy.
Eat better. Yeah. So we want to eat better as soon as possible. I think that's a good question, because it's like, why do we choose to not eat well? And I think it's a matter of self-respect. When I look at my kids and they're choosing to eat certain foods, can you choose to eat those foods that are going to have more of an inflammatory nature in the body, that taste really good and are initially very satisfying, but are going to provide maybe even like that next day hangover or that stomach ache, right? Or the headache. Those foods are going to cause that. So putting that into your mouth is actually a level of disrespect to yourself. And so I encourage my kids, and I would encourage my patients as well, to have as high level of respect for yourself first as possible. So eating the diet, we've heard this. We know the foods. Like, we have lists and lists, and we can Google lists. We can find them all over the place of these are the inflammatory foods. These are the anti-inflammatory foods. These are the things to eat. And people often say, oh, it's rabbit food. You mean I just have to eat rabbit food all the time? I'm like, dude, you eat whatever you want to eat. You just show by what you eat the level of respect you have for yourself. And you're also demonstrating to yourself how you want to feel in 10 years. Because how you feel in 10 years is basically going to be the perpetual nature of that moment that you experience after you eat that food, and you feel like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. Now I'm going to pay for it.
I mean, we're just trained. I think it's not our fault. It's our responsibility to deal with a culture of day trading.
Right.
We are in a day trade culture, a TikTok culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just the way that it is. So playing the 10-year long game requires a different mindset.
Yes, and it is a totally different mindset. And that's what we're trying to get people to do. I want people to be forward thinkers, to everything they put in their mouth, to think, what is this going to do for me? How is this going to fuel my body?
Well, because we've talked about it, and I had been like a health fanatic in my 20s, and then I just got to this point where I was like, it was too dogmatic, and I was not taking care of my emotional and relational needs and getting the right exercise. And I thought maybe it's more about the emotional side and the stress side. And when we started talking and I got my blood test done, you said you cannot underestimate the importance of metabolic health.
Yes.
So what does that mean?
So metabolic health is essentially the way that the cell receives and exchanges nutrients in the body. And if your cell is receiving signals from the space around it, the extracellular space, and it can exchange and receive nutrients, then you have good metabolic health. So, for instance, a patient who needs to eventually be on insulin has poor metabolic health because they're not receiving the sugar into their cell, and so they're having to actually receive assistance with that. Or they're not receiving or producing enough insulin because of the signals that are being sent. So we have to have a good, appropriate balance in the body of signals that are sent, and the receiving and exchange of nutrients by the cell itself has to be healthy. And that's metabolic health.
So you talk about inflammation as well. And we wrote some notes down, but inflammation, the greatest threat to aging well, associating how you feel with what you eat. And so food and inflammation, just to kind of help people understand the importance of reducing processed sugars. I mean, maybe what's your advice on food and then inflammation?
So ideally, I like to meet people where they are. And for any of you out there too, this is not a come to Jesus and you have to be perfect right now podcast. This is we want to meet you where you are and take you step by step until it's clicking and you feel those results in your life. And once you begin to feel those results as well, then you become, it's like teaching you to fish rather than just giving you fish. Because if I just give you fish and I just keep giving you this program and do this and do that and do that, then you're like, okay, I'm always dependent on this other person to tell me what to do in order for me to be healthy. But I want you to engage in it. I want the patient to engage in their health and to be aware of their own feelings and the signals that are being communicated to them by their gut and by their body when they eat a food. Is it creating inflammation? Is it creating a headache? Does it create bloating, constipation, diarrhea? Do I have joint pain soon after eating it and I haven't really worked out? Or maybe I ate this food and then I worked out, but it was a typical workout and I feel way more inflamed than I had previously. Well, that's an inflammatory food for you, right? And so our body elicits an immune response. The immune response is inflammatory in general. The inflammation that the immune response elicits is actually a healthy thing. And it helps our body to clean and eliminate pathogenic factors and problems that would otherwise interfere with our overall health. So we need that nice immune response. But again, how quickly am I able to recover and move through that immune response, right? So this is the key, is if I can eat and maintain a diet in such a way that I can have occasionally, achy soreness, but it goes away quickly, right? Even if it's somewhat severe or significant, but it goes away quickly. I have it for a day or something, and then, I'm feeling pretty good, right?
Even you mentioned having like a taco soup at home and kind of not feeling like it digested well and not sleeping that well that night. And I'm like, if you have an issue sometimes, it's okay for kind of forgive yourself and be like, I'm never going to be perfect. I will feel unwell sometimes.
Absolutely.
But hopefully it doesn't last forever, Trying to develop that level of realistic expectations,
Yeah, the perfect diet. So you're bringing to mind for me, I hear in my mind saying the perfect diet. So it's likely that some of you are wondering, okay, well, what's the diet? What should I be eating? The perfect diet is you listening to the foods and the way they communicate to you. That's the perfect diet. And so I know that sounds like maybe a cop-out even, right? But if I tell you, eat these foods and these foods and these foods because they work the best for me, and you have a different physiology and you travel and you go to different places, well, you need different foods. And your foods are going to respond differently to you at different times. And so the diet that's working for me in and out is not necessarily going to be the diet that's going to be the best for you. So when people write these books and, here, do this diet and do that diet, and only eat this foods or only eat these groupings of foods, that applies to, in my opinion, basically nobody.
Really? So you're taking shots fired at that whole industry?
Yes, I am.
Wow.
Yes, and I have for a long time. However, what's the benefit to that industry? The benefit of that industry is that it gives people a bit of a guide, like a stepping stone, to begin to become aware of how they feel on certain foods, certain groupings of foods, right? And within certain patterns. So find patterns that work for you, listen to your body, but the biggest thing is communication.
Well, I've been meditating now for a couple of years, and that doesn't mean anything. That's not me signaling to you that I'm some disciplined, enlightened being or whatever. It's teaching me, and it's a practice, to drop into now, and sometimes I'll just feel the socks in my shoes and kind of the clothes on my shoulders and kind of hear the buzzing of the vent and be like, oh, I'm right here right now. I might do that twice a day and just go totally mindless and numb for the rest of the day. But that's twice a day that I'm trying to listen in, right? So it's a practice. It doesn't necessarily mean that it even works for me some days. But when you talk about communication and listening, there is something to be said for getting silent enough, by meditating a little bit, to just sort of get in tune with your body and just like hear what's going on and not make it feel like you're a wimp, that you feel this pain or whatever, but just, hey, that's interesting. What's going on here?
Yeah, there's almost a fear in our culture of being quiet or having silence or not being busy. And a lot of people will choose to just make themselves busy to avoid their own thoughts. And I think that's an interesting thing to even think about, this idea that you're trying to avoid being with yourself. Take just a moment and wrap your brain around that, right? If you struggle being with yourself, why would you expect anyone else to want to be with you?
Ooh, that's good.
And I'm not trying to be demeaning. What I'm saying is you are absolutely worth being with, but you should learn who you are, right? And be that person now. And be aware of what you're receiving, the communication, the signals from your body. Be aware of those. And the way to do that is through a morning routine, through meditation, through reading a good book, right? Through taking some breathing exercises and just choosing to breathe in and out and taking a moment to just sit in silence. And find a moment, like you said, 10 minutes. If you can do 5 minutes, start with 2 minutes even. Some people can, I remember my elementary school teacher. She taught some of us more adventurous and excitatory young boys to count down from 10. And now I realize that was actually a form of meditation.
Oh, there's so much wisdom in the old school ways.
Right? Yeah. It's like 10, 9. Before you do anything, before you act now, count down from 10. And you count down and you're like, that gave me just enough time to rethink about what I want to do.
Right. And it's like, why do we focus on the breath? Vipassana meditation, I'm not an expert on it, but I've heard it said, at least partially, that if you're focusing on the breath or the rising and the falling of the chest, if nothing else, if you're actually focused on that, you're not focusing on all the things that were bothering you before. Exactly. So there's the fact that you're not focusing on the crazy chaos, or the fact that you're actually dropping into the present, or maybe that's the same thing, but the countdown from 10 to 0, counting sheep, it's a way to focus on one thing and not all the noise.
What is the most valuable thing on earth? If I could identify what the most valuable thing on earth was, I would certainly want to be with that, or have that, or stay with that. And I have learned in my life that the most valuable thing on earth is individuals. We are the most valuable thing on earth. We can also be, if we choose to live in dysfunction, the most destructive thing on earth. And if we live a life in destruction, if we live a life in dysfunction, then we are living a life of destruction. And why would we want to live our life that way? We want to live life as we truly are. And who we truly are is the greatest value on earth. Period. And so now, taking that you're the greatest value on earth, how do you want to feed yourself? How do you want to nourish yourself? How do you want to communicate with yourself? If you had something to say to yourself as the most valuable thing on earth, not as a comparative nature to someone else, but the most valuable thing on earth, singularly, individually, on your own, what do you say to yourself now?
I love you.
I love you. I love you. And then what food? You reach out in an act of love. You reach out and you give love to yourself. by eating. The thoughts that you have now, that you love yourself, you realize you're the most valuable thing on earth, and that value can actually instill even greater value in other things, which are also the most valuable thing on earth. That's incredible. That is what we are doing. And that is my mission, is to help instill in my patients that self-love, that self-caring, the self-respect to be able to say, I choose love in what I eat. I choose love in what I do. I choose love in how I behave. I choose love in my actions, words, and deeds.
And that will help us stay younger?
Absolutely, exactly. So if we're talking about meditation that we've mentioned, and when we look at research, those who meditate have lower levels of inflammation in their body. Individuals who eat methylated type foods, like foods that are farm to table. You hear it all the time. Eat foods farm to table, right? Pick it off the tree, dig it up out of the ground. Get your hands dirty in the dirt. Be involved in the microbiota. People who eat foods that have more methylation factors in them have lower levels of incidence of diabetes and autoimmune-related disorders. Diabetes and autoimmune-related disorders are inflammatory in nature. These are inflammatory disorders. If you want to live younger and reduce your chances and likelihood of having these inflammatory disorders, then reduce the inflammatory foods that you're consuming by being in touch with yourself and having some self-respect and self-love and choosing those foods that are going to sustain a reduced level of inflammation moving forward. And if you have a reduced level of inflammation, the reason we say you're going to feel younger or you're going to live younger than your age is because the majority of people in the United States right now have autoimmune-related disorders. There's something like 160, let's see, I think it's 88 million have diabetes. 88 million. That's a significant number, right? And so you look at those people who have an autoimmune condition of some sort, and I think it's near half the population. There's an issue that we have here. It's an issue of, I think, self-love and self-respect.
It's easy to talk about this stuff. It's a lot harder to eat well when there's dysfunction in your body. I got my blood tests done, and you'd read them, and there was a significant viral load in there, and you said this could have been from when you got an ear infection as a kid, and they gave you antibiotics, and maybe it pushed it down somewhere. I mean, you could explain it better, but I've been on this viral protocol for a couple months, and listen, I'm crave sweets my whole life, caffeine, stimulant addict. Like, trust me, I am not the paragon of health, but the last couple months,
cravings are gone.
The cravings for sweets are gone. And I'm just saying, like, hallelujah.
Yep.
Like, and you said there's a gut-brain link and that the bacteria craves a certain type of food, and when you kill that off, and it's kind of worked. But if you've never experienced that, you're gonna be like, okay, it's one thing to say I need to eat better, but all this other food, I'm just craving it. It's really hard. Life is stressful.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pay my bills. Maybe I'm feeling lonely. Like, the human condition is one of suffering, and so to try to eat better is a Herculean task. Yeah,
the human condition can be one of suffering.
Oh, I thought the Buddha said life is suffering.
Yeah, can be one of suffering.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let me put it in this perspective, right? So if you have a knowledge or awareness of some sort of, different, higher, significant way of living, then is your current state suffering? Well, it can be if all you want to do is be in a different state. But if you choose to be in the state where you are and choose to engage and be aware of where you are, then you can actually make choices and decisions. And you say, I'm choosing this now. This is where I am. This is what's happened. I'm going to be here now. I'm going to be well now. and I step in and I choose to be engaged where I am, then I have a significant amount of empowerment. So the level of suffering reduces significantly. Okay? Now, also, you mentioned again and brought that up, the gut-brain connection. And that is huge for me. And I have a story I just want to share quickly. And this is about the zombie ant. And I love to share this with my patients. And I do see sometimes when I share this with patients that they'll look at me sometimes with glassed-over eyes. And then other times they look at me like a light bulb went on. And what I'm hoping is that when you hear this story and it comes after what we've already talked about, that the light bulb will come on as far as how we can make a difference in our health and how we can live younger regardless of our age. So what will happen to this ant, the zombie ant, is it can get infected in a fungus. Now think of an ant, for instance. Have you ever seen an ant farm? Have you ever seen just an ant? Well, let's even say ants on your driveway or ants on your desk somewhere. Well, they all form this really nice, organized line, and it goes right to a specific source of, food or structure or whatever they're gathering, right? They all have really specific instructions. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're not wandering off. So an ant, if it gets infected, it can wander away from its line of duty, and climb up a tree to a specific height onto the underside of a leaf and then pinch with its pincers a death grip until at a certain time the fungus will begin to grow and consume it and sustain itself by consuming the ant. So my point with that is that every living organism, every living thing wants to sustain life. And some things are in harmony in an environment, and some things are in dysfunction in an environment. And where we see dysfunction, just like in environmental sciences, we see dysfunction. We see rivers, we see ponds, we see streams that become polluted, we see air. These things can become polluted, and we have to solve the crisis, solve the problem, to clean the air, to clean the river, to clean the toxins, right? Well, in a biotic species, it's living. And just like the ant, the biotic culture took over its nervous system or communicated through its nervous system to its brain, right? It communicated through its nervous system to make it perform or give it cravings to perform certain tasks. And those tasks were so overwhelming that it eventually was all-consuming. And that's exactly how it is for us. It's no different. So what we want to be doing is creating an environment of a species of culture in our gut and our body that is sustaining of a healthy and functional, not dysfunctional, but a functional way of living. And if we have a dysfunctional balance in a bacteria or dysfunctional balance of a virus or some other form of species in our body that's causing dysfunction, we need to address that.
Well, let's end here. If they want to get their blood tests and read by you, how about you tell them how they can find your office and maybe get some kind of appointment with you, because I think this is an invaluable discussion.
Yeah, so
it's helped me a lot so far.
Good. Well, so it's Community Health and Wellness. That's the name of our practice here. It's our integrative clinic. And our phone number, you can reach us here at 435-657-3696. And you can reach us online, which is where a lot of people find us nowadays. Because
you have clients all over the world now.
Yeah, and people find us online a lot. So it's chwheber.com.
HEBER.com. Hey, before we say this word that's going to freak some people out, what does namaste mean?
Namaste is essentially a recognition of the divinity in you. So I recognize the divine in you, and you recognize the divine in me. So when we say namaste, we're recognizing ultimately that you and I are the greatest value on earth.
Namaste.
Namaste.